Welcome to Everyday Economics, a podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, president of the 501c3 nonprofit Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics, a production of America's Talking Network. You can check out all of our great podcasts at americastalking.com. We are recording this episode on Friday, March 10th. And joining me, as always, my partner, my friend, Dr. Orphe Divounguy, PhD economist. Dr. O, you're going to have to settle me down because I'm pretty fired up. You know, part of the responsibility of the chairman of the Federal Reserve is to show up at Congress, I believe at least a couple times a year, and to try to make sense of the economy for the benefit of people who are elected officials in Washington, people in the House, people in the Senate. Jerome Powell did that this week. You know, he was there, I believe it was on Tuesday. And as you and I discussed this after watching a fair amount of the testimony and a fair amount of the clips, to me, it's evident that the people in Congress don't understand what the Federal Reserve's role is in the economy and what their role is in the economy. They were all over Jerome Powell about the things that he's doing to stabilize the economy. And I'm not going to rush in and defend Jerome Powell. He can handle himself. Smart man. He's got some wherewithal, right? He's been around the Fed for a while. I don't need to protect him from criticism, but I need to offer up a perspective to the people that are listening today that when you're asking the Fed chief, basically whether he's going to turn the switch in one direction or another, and you act as if you have had nothing to do with the problem that he's trying to repair, it's just so disingenuous.
I share your frustration a little bit, Chris. Look, what I didn't understand were some of the line of questioning, right? And again, I'm not defending Jay Powell because he's way smarter than me. I just didn't understand some of the line of questioning. I heard a gentleman call out Jay Powell and saying interest payments on debt are going up, and basically blaming the Fed for that. I think a lot of people don't understand that it's Congress' job to legislate. If we have a problem with Social Security, our Social Security is running out of money, Congress needs to legislate. Social Security reform comes from Congress. The Fed has nothing to do with it. And so talking about Social Security to the Fed chair makes absolutely no sense. But sadly, I feel like these legislators didn't even know that it's their job to fix Social Security.
Yeah, I mean, it's as if he's just sitting on a giant stack of money and deciding whether or not to throw more or less, toward the people. It's just
I think people blame the Fed.
What is the role of the Fed?
The Fed's jobs, and the Fed has a dual mandate, very simply. Full employment, meaning they want to keep the unemployment rate as low as possible. They want to make sure that every American who wants a job is working. And at the same time, keep inflation low and stable, because low and stable inflation is good for sustainable economic growth, right? If prices are rising out of control one year and rising further out of control, it's going to be very, very hard for an economy to keep growing, because look, when prices rise too rapidly, people get squeezed. And we saw that. We're seeing that already. And so that's the job of the Fed. But at the same time, what people don't understand is that it's not just the fact people don't just get squeezed by the price increases. It's also businesses get squeezed. And how do businesses get squeezed? Businesses, consumers, everybody gets squeezed. They get squeezed by higher interest rates. And higher interest rates are not set by the Fed. I got to dispel this myth right now. People think that the Fed is raising interest rates, and that's the reason why every interest rate in the economy is going up. No, it's not. The Fed is responding to higher inflation, and the Fed's job is to bring down inflation. And so interest rates respond to higher inflation. And let me explain that in terms that everybody can understand. If you come to me to borrow money and you want to borrow over the course of, let's say, 2 years or even just 1 year, right? And you say, hey, Orphe, can you lend me some money? I got to give you that money and expect a rate of return that's going to outpace inflation, or where I think prices are going to be next year. So if I think prices are going up 10% next year over the course of the year, I'm going to expect you to pay me, to compensate me, a rate of return that is higher than the rate of inflation. Otherwise, if I lend you money at less than 10%, what do you think would happen? My money would be worth less when I get it tomorrow, next year. You'd pay me back in dollars that are worth less than they worth today. I'd be able to.
If you get it back at all.
If I get it back. Exactly. I'd be able to buy less stuff with my money if I didn't charge you a rate of return that outpace the rate of inflation. And so that's what we're seeing in the markets today. When long-term interest rates increase in response to higher inflation numbers, it's lenders or savers expecting a higher interest rate, an interest rate that's high enough to compensate for inflation risk, for the fact that they don't know where inflation is going to be next year, the fact that they maybe expect inflation to be higher next year, right? If inflation's high today and they expect inflation to be higher next year, they're going to expect a higher interest rate. Otherwise, they're not going to lend to you at all. It's not worth it for them. They'd have no incentive to lend to you at all. And so interest rates go up, right? These price adjustments are there so that savers and lenders have an incentive to lend. If the price doesn't adjust and inflation's going up too fast, right? Lenders are not going to lend you any money at all, right? And so we're going to have an issue with liquidity. And so I think it's important that people realize that interest rates are adjusting in response to the inflation threat, the inflation risk. Your credit card bills, all that stuff is not, you can't blame the Fed for that. What you can blame the Fed for, though, is that they were slow to respond. They were slow to respond to the inflation threat. When inflation showed up, they were slow to respond. Another point that's really important to make for the people in Congress that are worried, and by the way, I am one of those people that's worried that higher interest rates are going to hurt low-income families. Okay? It is a concern. Okay? It's a serious concern. But let me explain. If you're worried about low-income families, you have to worry about two things. For one, they're facing higher prices. The Fed is trying to bring those prices down, or at least reduce the pace of price increases. For two, these families are facing higher debt cost, which is squeezing them. And while people are blaming the Fed for that, I just explained it's inflation. It's inflation that's the problem. So these families are being squeezed on both ends. Higher price increases, higher debt cost. And so if you worry about those families, your issue should be with inflation. Your issue should be with inflation. Remember, the Fed has only these few instruments that are kind of blunt, right? They affect everybody at the same time. If you worry about the distribution of income, your job in Congress is to legislate. You're the one that gets to set fiscal policy. You're the one that gets to set tax policy. You're the one that gets to say, hey, we're going to take from this person and pass it on to that person. We're going to reduce, if you had done something about regulations, building regulations, or mandated state local governments to approve building permits faster or something, we wouldn't have had the surge. We probably would have had a smaller surge in house prices, a smaller, we wouldn't have the affordability challenges, housing affordability challenges that we're facing today. So again, my point here is I think our elected officials need to be aware of the fact that fiscal policy is in their hands. It's not the Fed's job. And that they can actually go out and legislate, pass laws that would help the Fed bring inflation down faster for low-income families.
Good stuff as always, O. For Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other quality podcasts at americastalking.com.